The U.S. investments in nanotechnology science over the past 2 decades positioned us as a global leader in this foundational discipline. But a new report from the National Academies of Science warns that without continued investment, we are at risk of ceding our leadership to other countries to the detriment of our innovative industries. The chair of that report, Dean of the LSU College of Engineering and the Burt S. Turner Chair, Dr. Vicki Colvin, is here to discuss the report and its implications. Dr. Colvin, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm happy to be here. Always happy to talk about nanotechnology. And just to remind you, these are my own personal views, even though we'll be talking about a report I chaired for the National Academies.
Well, let's talk about nanotechnology, because I feel like I need to ask the very basic question. What is it and where does it show up in my daily life?
So nanotechnology is the study and application of any material that is smaller than about 100 nanometers in one critical dimension. That definition is actually one that our National Institute for Standards has adopted. But what that really means is it can show up in a lot of different places because it's about the material, not about the application. So, for example, in our latest one of our COVID vaccines used liposomal particles for delivery. So those were nanoscale materials. So it shows up a lot right now in medicine. Some of the best cancer therapeutics out there are nanoformulations. So they're very, very small packages where they're nanoscale with drugs inside. You can also find nanotechnology in your iPhone. A lot of the most advanced batteries that we have use nanoscale structures so that the batteries last longer and they charge faster. And you can also find nanotechnology even in your clothing and your personal care products. Many things that make our lives better and easier because we can make really, really small materials that have super cool properties.
So that is really helpful as a stage setting, because this report is the quadrennial review of the National Nanotechnology Initiative, and it focuses a lot on nanotechnology infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So with the concept of nanotechnology now embedded, what is the National Nanotechnology Infrastructure?
So an infrastructure, I like to think of it, is like our highway system. It's a set of facilities, actually also people, instruments that's everywhere throughout the country. It can be in universities, it can be in national labs, but it's all facilities that anyone can use, just like our highway systems, our state highway systems. And so it's an enabler. It lets, medical doctors who are trying to make the next formulation of drugs, for example, for Alzheimer's, go and study nanoparticles that may be able to cross the blood-brain barrier for treating disease. That's actually a really hard problem. They can use the nanotechnology infrastructure to study that problem. Also, the next generation of chips that we're going to make to drive our AI, maybe lower power chips, those are also going to get constructed in fabrication facilities that anyone can sign up to use. And they're maintained and they're made available to researchers both in universities and also in companies, both large and small. So it's an investment that we've made over the last 2 decades as a country. And just like our interstate highways, it carries everyone to both develop new technologies, new applications, and lay the foundation for the next breakthroughs.
Well, that's an interesting metaphor, because you say in the report that investment over the last 20 years has made the United States the leader in nanotechnology and in nanotechnology infrastructure. But not unlike the highway system, it requires sustained investment. And the report says we might not be continuing in that leadership position.
Absolutely. So we were studying this at the request of Congress, which mandates every 4 years a review of the nation's leadership in nanotechnology. And this report focused on infrastructure. So absolutely, just like our highways, you have to be out there, you have to clear them, you have to repave them, you have to update them. And if you don't do that, they fall into disrepair and no longer serve anywhere. And that's what we're seeing in our infrastructure. The infrastructure investments that we've made serve tens of thousands of researchers all over the country, everywhere from Colorado to Massachusetts to here, Louisiana to California. And we identify in the report that there has to be an ongoing investment in the infrastructure because it's serving emerging areas, both existing nanotechnology, commercial development, as well as quantum information systems, the new chips that are going to be the backbone of artificial intelligence. those are all systems and questions that researchers and companies alike need the facilities, they need the microscopes, they need the fabrication tools that the infrastructure provides. So we have to, as a nation, continually invest, both to stabilize what we have and also to really take in new tools that allow us to keep our leadership in these areas.
I am speaking with Dr. Vicki Colvin. She is the Dean of the Louisiana State University College of Engineering and the Bert S. Turner Chair. She's also the long-term director of the National Science Foundation Center for Biological and Environmental Nanotechnology. All right, so let's think about that strategy and that investment, because the federal government is not the only organization that makes these kinds of investments. Are they the organization that kind of organizes the strategy and organizes all the partners?
Yeah, I think the federal government has served two really important roles. So nanotechnology is a topic within science and also, I'll argue, in commerce that really spans many different disciplines and many different industries. So when you're doing anything with small little pieces of matter, the infrastructure is very specialized, it's expensive, but it serves a lot of different people. So the issue, I think, with any infrastructure investment is asking a company to build an infrastructure. First of all, it's very, very expensive, and it may not directly link to their commercial outcomes. So the investment, the capital investment, the people investment in, let's say, a state-of-the-art electron microscope, which we use to see particles, that may not make sense for an industry, but they might want to rent one for a while or go and use a facility that's already stood up. And so I think that the federal government, just like we know already from our transportation infrastructures, is a great organization to both coordinate, sustain, make available, what we have out there. But it's also going to be important that we engage companies in using the infrastructure, which we already do, and that we maintain it so it serves the next generation of companies and researchers.
So who are the key federal agencies that are kind of in the center of this policy development?
Right. So the National Nanotechnology Initiative is a congressional authorization that actually says we're going to pool together like one large collaboration between agencies like the National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, National Institute for Health. Just about every federal agency you can imagine is part of the National Nanotechnology Initiative. So really what Congress did that was so wise almost 20 years ago is it said, let's make a coordination office that brings together all of the agencies who are investing in their own ways for their own missions, but let's make sure they're all talking, they're all sharing information, and in the case of infrastructure, making those infrastructures available broadly to all populations. For NIH, for example, will use the infrastructure that DOE sustains, for example. And that's just a really efficient way to use an infrastructure and to really, one of the reasons we're the leader in nanotechnology. Many other countries around the world, once they saw our success, started to copy us and say, oh, we're going to do that. We're going to make a coordination office so all of our different agencies who are siloed can all come together and sort of share their investments and take advantage of what their partners might be doing.
So this report actually is both a backward look and a forward look, and it has some recommendations. Tell me a little bit about what you envision for the future and what the recommendations are in the report.
Right. So we have a number of recommendations. Some of the high-level ones, probably the most notable, is the recommendation that the nation reinvest in nanotechnology. It was started, like I said, almost 20 years ago by a congressional authorization. However, it's no longer an initiative, right? It's been around 20 years. It's got proven success. We identified over 8 Nobel Prizes that U.S. scientists and engineers have won that are directly the result of those investments, companies and whole industries that started. So really, it's no longer an initiative. It's kind of matured. It's at the teenager stage, young adult stage. So we recommend that we look at this investment as really a prize resource of the nation, and that we reinvest in the national nanotechnology infrastructure, recognizing that highway system, that way that we have of accelerating research and development across the country, is really one of the lasting legacies. And that still needs coordination. It still needs investment because it's still serving an exponentially increasing number of users actually many users from emerging areas, critical technology areas that the nation's identified, like biotechnology, quantum information systems. So that infrastructure remains highly relevant, and that would be a great transition that would look at the future for nanotechnologies, kind of a backbone leadership area of the nation that stays strong and propels us forward in all these other areas.
I imagine that most of the work on the report was done prior to President Trump's inauguration in January. We just got the 2026 budget from the Trump administration, and many of the agencies that you mentioned, National Science Foundation, National Institutes for Health, Department of Energy, are facing massive budget cuts. So how do you think this report's recommendations will be received? What do you see in terms of actual investment that would correspond with that recommendation?
Well, I'll take the last part of that first. It's hard to know what the actual investments are going to be. The agencies just got a glimpse in the president's budget of a possible FY26 world. And I think a lot of their strategic conversations are going to be, what do we do to sustain, the nation's leadership in science and technology? How do we deploy these resources in the most effective and efficient ways? You're right, the cuts are severe in some cases. And I think that, my hope, and I can't say for sure what the agencies are going to do, but I think it's important that we look at the nation's investment in S&T, and it's been 70 years since, really the 1950s when Vannevar Bush started and really made that contract for research universities and the federal government to sort of partner. And I think what we're seeing is a contraction in that partnership, but it still isn't zero. And I think the science and technology community broadly is going to be asking the really hard questions of, if it's going to contract, if federal investment's going to contract, how do we stay relevant? How do we continue to lead the globe? And how do we continue to bring forward the technologies of the future and ensure that our national security is state of the art? How do we do that? And I think that one of the answers is going to be to look at our infrastructure. Our infrastructure is a investment that's going to help everyone. And one of the cases we make in this report is that it's sitting, we've done a great job up until the last couple of years, we argued, of really sustaining and building the infrastructure. And that's going to be a legacy that federal investment there is going to have 10x or 100x payoffs, because that's the kind of infrastructure companies might start to utilize or other partnerships can take over. It's just a very efficient way to utilize a smaller pie for S&T. And it's also important to coordinate. If you have a smaller budget, you certainly don't want people to duplicate effort. You want to create really state-of-the-art infrastructure and make sure it's available to everyone, but not duplicative. And so I think that coordination piece actually becomes more important, not less important, as we're facing some really tough decisions. But I think going forward, if you ask the question, should we just do everything we were doing before but less of it? I'm guessing the people thinking about strategy are going to be looking, how do we shift some of our investment thinking? And how do we, for example, get more companies engaging in our S&T enterprise, carrying some of that load for their own reasons? And if they do that, which they will because of what we offer, they're going to need that infrastructure. So I think that is going to be a really important finding going forward, that especially in this contraction infrastructure, if we lose that, if we no longer have the highway system, then we really are going to be slower and not as good and not as efficient. If we keep that highway system, our infrastructure really state of the art, we have the potential to remain in a leadership position with co-funding and collaboration that perhaps relies on a broader set of funders.
Well, there will definitely be some interesting trade-offs and some, I'm sure,
Absolutely.
long conversations about prioritization. Dr. Vicki Colvin is Dean of the LSU College of Engineering and the Burt S. Turner Chair. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.